This is a neat spot that I think a lot of people mess up. On high connected boards, like this board, the preflop raiser has both the range advantage and the nut advantage. Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com, back with another hand from the 200-400 heads-up feud between Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu. They are playing the Cadillac of Poker, No Limit Texas Hold'em. Doug Polk wakes up with a premium hand, 8-2 suited on the button. He raises it up, and Daniel Negreanu calls. You may say, 8-2 suited? Why are we playing 8-2 suited? Well, it turns out you should play 8-2 suited. From the button, you need to play very, very wide. If you are unfamiliar with heads-up GTO preflop strategies, I have a completely free download for you. Check it out at pokercoaching.com/HUNL, where you can download the preflop ranges so you never have to guess what the right play is ever again before the flop. Negreanu calls with a 10-8, certainly reasonable, and the flop comes ace, jack, 9. Negreanu checks, as he should do with his entire range, and now this is a neat spot that I think a lot of people mess up. On high connected boards, like this board, the preflop raiser has both the range advantage and the nut advantage. What I mean by this is Doug Polk's raising all of the best hands, right? He obviously has some bad hands too, but he has all the best hands, like pocket aces, pocket jacks, pocket nines, ace jack, jack 9 suited, jack 9 offsuit, right? Doug Polk has essentially every combination of nut hand available in this scenario. Negreanu, however, does not, because he would have re-raised with pocket aces and pocket jacks and pocket nines and ace jack, which means he is at a severe nut disadvantage. He has way fewer nut combinations in his range than Doug Polk has in the spot. So, when that's the case, and the board's kind of connected, you typically want to be betting quite large as the player on the button. And let's take a look at what Doug Polk does. He actually goes for the overbet. He bets $2,400 into the $1,900 pot. And if we look at the GTO solver here, it actually recommends this play. With 8-2 suited, it is overbetting some portion of the time. And notice here, the overbet is actually the preferred bet size. You may say, why are we checking so often on this flop? Well, it's actually kind of likely Negreanu connects with this board, right? He's not going to connect as strong as as well as Doug Polk's going to connect, but he is going to connect with this board a decent amount of the time. And when Negreanu doesn't connect with this board, he's going to have like 6-5 offsuit, which is in horrible shape anyway, right? So whenever we are betting this board using a big size, we're betting very polarized, meaning we're betting our best hands and some draws. So take a look at this range, right? The hands in red are bet, the hands in green are checked, hands in gray are not in our range because we would have folded them pre-flop. So we see basically ace 10 and better is value betting using a large size. Then a bunch of draws are betting, like king queen 10, queen 10, queen 8, 10-8, 10-7, all of these are draws. And then a bunch of random junky hands with backdoor equity, like the 8-2 suited, right? 8-2, the backdoor flush draw, is betting a decent amount of the time here. Same thing with 10-2 suited, queen 3 suited, 5-3 suited, right? And by using this strategy, it puts Negreanu in a spot where he doesn't know if Doug Polk has a really good hand, like ace 10 or better, or a really junky hand. And that's not really the scenario you want to be in. Using this strategy is going to let Doug Polk essentially manufacture the size of the pot on average by the time we get to the river if he bets very polarized on the flop, the turn, and the river, which, spoiler alert, is probably what's going to happen. So facing the overbet, Negreanu should not raise here very often at all because Doug Polk's range is incredibly strong. And when your opponent's range is incredibly strong and polarized, you in turn don't get to raise with anything. Notice here, the GTO strategy for Negreanu is to call 40% of his range, fold everything else. And it's pretty logical what to call here with, right? Like any pair pretty much calls. Notice some underpairs do just fold immediately, which makes sense against a giant bet. All the straight draws are going to stick around, right? So pretty easy strategy in this scenario. Notice the 10-8 does just call all the time. Actually, 9-8 offsuit folds here, which is kind of neat. I'm kind of surprised to see 9-8 fold against the big bet, but facing a big bet, you should fold out a lot of the time. Anyway, Negreanu does call, turns a 7 of clubs. Negreanu checks. Now, this is an interesting situation because I think a lot of people mess this up. So you know what I want you to do? I want you to tell me what you would do in the comment section below. If you were in Doug Polk's shoes here when Negreanu checks the turn, when the turn gives you a bad gut shot straight draw, would you check? Would you bet small, like 30% pot? Would you bet big, like 100% pot? Or would you bet gigantic, like 3 times the size of the pot? Go ahead, type it in the comment section below. Going through this active learning process will help make you better at poker because you're sitting here thinking and learning instead of, having a beer and messing around. So go ahead, type it in the comments below. Okay, did you do it? This is a really interesting scenario where when you bet polarized on the flop, like Polk presumably did, you are going to be polarized on basically every turn. Notice some of Polk's hands actually became nut hands on the turn, like 10-8. Obviously, he doesn't have it this time, but he could have it. So this is a situation where when you bet polarized on the flop, you're going to want to continue betting using a large size on the turn. So let me show you the GTO strategy here. We see a pot size bet is used with, again, basically all the best hands, right? Ace 10 and better. If you did have some weaker aces, those are going for bets sometimes in this situation. Draws like Queen 10, King 10, right? These are still betting a lot of the time. And then bluffs. And the bluffs at this point are going to be a lot of hands containing a 10 and a lot of hands containing an 8. Notice the hands containing a queen aren't really betting so much anymore because they did not pick up additional equity. When you bet with the 8-2, for example, sometimes you get a 10 and you make it straight and you win. When you bet with a 10, sometimes you get an 8 on the river and you win. Whereas when you bet with a queen, there's not really any hand or any card that's going to bail you out on the river all that often. So this is a interesting scenario where when the turn is something like the 7 of clubs, you're going to find the GTO strategy is to pot it with the vast majority of your range. If the turn was a more blank turn, like let's say a 2 of diamonds, then you'd be overbetting again because we're still just like even more polarized in that scenario, and Negreanu is not going to connect well with that turn card at all. And if the turn was something like the Queen of Clubs, which is going to give Negreanu a lot of marginal made hands, now you'd be using a smaller bet size. So depending on how the turn card connects with the board, as it connects better and better with the board, you typically want to bet on the smaller side in this interesting scenario because as the turn card connects better with the board, Negreanu is going to improve his equity more often in these scenarios. So, cool spot where Doug Polk does use straight up the GTO strategy. 8-2 here is going for the bet the vast majority of the time. And in this scenario, Negreanu is in a pretty similar spot where he just has to call a lot, which is what he does. Take a look at GTO strategy again. Almost no raising, a whole lot of calling. The 10-8s that are raising, by the way, are 10-8 of clubs the vast majority of the time, and the others are mixing it in a little bit. So 10-8 of clubs raises every time. All the other 10-8s raise sometimes. But for the most part, we are calling a large chunk of the time here as well. Also, worth noting, given it's pretty clear Doug Polk likes to bluff on the flop, the turn, and the river, I definitely like the idea of calling a little bit more often. If you know your opponent likes to play really strong battling poker where they're going to be blasting it sometimes on the river, you really, really, really want to protect your range by calling with some nut hands that you just know you're not folding. So I like to call a lot from Negreanu. River's at 4 of diamonds, Negreanu checks. And now, fun spot on the river, right? If you all watched this hand live, you may have been very surprised to see what happened here. But Doug Polk goes all in. 3.5 times pot. You don't see a whole lot of 3.5 times pot bets on the river, but Doug Polk does it. And if you look at the game theory optimal strategy, again, a small bet of 50% pot is basically never used. A pot size bet is basically never used. The only bet sizes used here are 150% pot bet and an all-in bet. Neat spot, right? It's actually kind of similar to the turn, where if the turn connected very well with the board, like a queen or a 10, Doug Polk would actually not go all in very often at all. But on these really blank rivers, where backdoor flush draws miss, etc. This is a spot where Doug Polk should be using the very large bet size. His 8-2 suited, you see down here, is actually mixed between all in or 150% pot. And you see it's doing it like every single time. It only checks about 12% of the time in this spot. Notice other hands that are opting to bluff, these 10s that do not improve to the bottom pair, right? So notice 10-4 and 8-4 don't go for the bet. 10-5, 8-5, 8-6. Really, all of these hands down here that have nothing are going for the big bet. Also notice 10-8, the nuts goes for the big bet. Pocket jacks, basically the nuts. I know it would have lost this time, but basically the nuts goes for the big bet. Same thing with pocket aces. So very neat scenario where Doug Polk, right off the bat, takes a polarized strategy by betting the flop big and then follows through with the turn bet and the river bet. Obviously, Negreanu is going to call with this hand, which he does, and he's going to win a gigantic pot. But let's take a look at what he's actually supposed to call with here. Kind of a neat situation where he's really supposed to fold a lot of the time, right? He's only supposed to call 22% of the time in this scenario. And he's supposed to call with, well, let's just go through all the hands. Ace-8 every once in a while. Top pair blocking the straight, which makes some sense. Ace-10, top pair blocking the straight, which makes some sense. Ace-Jack 2 pair, that beats some value bets. Notice here, well, does it beat some value bets? Not a lot of them. Maybe it doesn't actually beat all that many value bets. I guess it's just a good enough hand to call in this scenario. Ace-9 calls, Ace-Jack calls. We see Jack 10 calling a tiny portion of the time. Again, blocking straights. We see Jack 9 calling a lot. 10-8 obviously calls, but everything else folds. This is a spot where I think a lot of people probably make an error in general against their opponents where they just call all the top pairs thinking, oh, they're probably bluffing a lot. That said, other people probably make the error of folding all the time. And if you think about it, if you're playing, let's say 1-2-no limit at your local casino, how often do you see a 3.5 times pot bet on the river? Not very often, right? And against most of those players, it's either a very, very premium hand from your opponent, or it's a really, really junky hand, and that makes your life really easy. The thing is, though, Doug Polk is playing good, fundamentally sound poker here, and that puts Negreanu in a really, really tough spot, because if he does not respond appropriately, he's going to get demolished. So cool spot where I think a lot of people looked at this bluff from Doug Polk and thought, oh my god, that's insane. Why would he possibly bet 3.5 times pot on the river with only the 8 high? But it turns out GTO Solver either likes the 3.5x pot river shove or a 1.5x pot river bet. Either way, he's going to torch some money on this hand whenever Negreanu happens to have the nuts, and it's always nice when you wake up with the nuts and your opponent 3.5x pots it. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click the like button, click subscribe button down below. There's a notification bell as well. I've been uploading a lot of interesting poker hands recently from High Stakes Poker, a great show on Poker Go, the World Series of Poker Final Table that has coverage from pokernews.com, so make sure you check that out, and from this High Stakes Feud. That's me for today. Good luck, have fun, make the most of your experience. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.